are actually going to look at what we call trigonometry. So this topic is very, very important, and you need to really grab the marks in the exam. So now, before we talk about trigonometry, so I'm going to introduce what I call the right-angled triangle. Let's say, for an example, you're in the exam, you have a right-angled triangle. This is a right-angled triangle. So that is what they're going to give you, or they're going to ask you. Okay? So therefore, let's say this is A, that is B, then that is C. So in the right-angled triangle, there are a few things that they're going to ask you that we need to take note of. The first one, they're going to ask you about the side. And the second one, they're going to ask you about the angle. So these are two things that they're going to ask you, the side and the angle. Side and angle. So now, when you have this thing, we're going to use a few things. Number one, what are we going to use? We're going to use things to use. We're going to use number A, which are what we call the trig ratios. That is the trig ratios. Then number two, we're going to use the theorem of Pythagoras. The theorem of Pythagoras. Then number three, we're going to use the sum of the angle of a triangle, which is A plus B plus C, which is equal to 180. So now these are the three things that we are actually going to use when we are talking about the trigonometry. Okay, so now what are the trig ratio? Somebody can ask, what are the trig ratio? The trig ratio, let's start now, the trig ratios. When we talk about the trig ratio, we're talking about this thing called, I'm just going to write it as so, ka, to, a. So now when we talk about the trig ratio, we're talking about sine. So now when we talk about the sine, this O stands for opposite. It is the side that is opposing the angle and over hypotenuse. Then when we talk about the cos, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. Then when we talk about the tan, it's opposite over adjacent. Opposite over adjacent. So that is very, very important to note. So now, how do I really identify this thing? Normally, the longer side, we call it the hypotenuse. Okay? Then the side that is with the angle that we're dealing with, we call it the adjacent. Then the side that is opposing the angle, we call it opposite. So something becomes opposite because it is opposing the angle. And adjacent is the side that is with the angle that you are dealing with per time. Therefore now, let's say for example, you wanna, when do I really use this thing? Number one, let's just say I want to really calculate the side. That's where I'm gonna start now. Calculate the side. Calculate the side. So now if I have to calculate the side, rule number one, if they give you two sides, in a right angle triangle, that is where you're going to use theorem of Pythagoras. That will be r squared, it's equal to x squared plus y squared. So now whenever you've got two sides, you're going to use the theorem of Pythagoras. And then number two, if they give you one side plus an angle, one angle, okay? So which means that you're going to use what we call the trig ratio. We're still going to look at that, the trig ratio, okay? Then number two, we have what we call, we have to calculate the angle, okay? How do we calculate the angle? I'm just going to squeeze it, calculate the angle. Calculate the angle. Number one, they're going to give you, if they give you two angles, that is where you're going to say A plus B plus C is equal to 180. That is the sum of a triangle in a triangle. Therefore, number two, they're going to give you two sides. If they give you two sides, that is where you're going to use what we call the trig ratio. The trig ratio. So now, if you can work on that, then that will be done. So now this is all in terms of what we call the right angle triangle. Very, very important to note that we are going to use few things. Number one, we're going to use trig ratio. Number two, we're going to use theorem of Pythagoras. Number three, we're going to use the sum of a triangle in a triangle. So now those are the three things that we're going to use, and we are going to use them effectively. So before we go and look for the example, they are as well the other trig ratios that we can really look at. So what are those trig ratios that I am really talking about here? We have what we call cos. Remember, we've got cos, we've got tan, and sine. So these three also has what we call the other trig ratios that we can look at. Number one, we can look at cosec. If you have cosec, let me just write cosec theta. So you only check the third letter. The third letter here is S. So that will be 1 over sine theta. Then you have cot. You check the third letter. The third letter represents tan. That will be 1 over tan theta. Then we have sec. So remember, the sec represent cos. So that will be 1 over cos theta. So these are the three that they are going to give you. So that is how you can change them. Always you change them like that. So we'll be going forward